Welcome to the State of Affairs in partnership with Serbian Radio Chicago. We are having conversations that matter, and today's conversation is certainly going to matter because I am honored to be joined by Lara Logan. And Lara Logan is a trailblazing, investigative, independent journalist. She was the host of Lara Logan Has No Agenda on Fox Nation, and she was somebody who consistently reported from the war zones and front lines. And I am so happy to talk to her today because she has a lot to share. And just to segue into her Fox Nation stint, Lara, welcome. And tell me about Lara Logan Has No Agenda.
Well, I wanted to come up with a title that I thought was both honest and accurate, and also would drive them crazy every time they had to say it, right? Because when they attack me, they are the ones who have to prove that I have an agenda. I don't have to prove it because I don't have one. My job as a journalist is to find the truth. And, you know, for 16 years before that, I was at 60 Minutes and CBS News. And long before that, I was at British TV and newspapers in South Africa and CBS Radio. I reported for them for 8 years. So I've been a journalist for 35 years plus at this point, since I was 17 years old. And I would say, yeah, I've learned a lot along the way. Some of it,
I'm sure you have.
Some of it not so good, you know, learning how understanding how little I knew at certain times when I was reporting, and how easily you can be manipulated and used when that's the case.
Well, and that is interesting. And we had a bit of a conversation about that prior to starting the interview. So let's actually talk about some of these locations where you've spent a lot of time and you made your career through this really breakthrough reporting. But given that we are connecting to Serbian Radio Chicago, talk about your time spent in Kosovo, because that was something that sort of created the blueprint for things that were to come later on, as we're going to discuss. So tell me about that a bit.
Yes. So I feel, you know, at first in Kosovo, I was working for CNN.
Mm-hmm.
And I was doing what a lot of reporters are doing right now in Ukraine. I
Sure.
was running from bomb to bomb and tragedy to tragedy. And I was doing my very best to report honestly and accurately and memorably about what I witnessed. The problem with that sort of model of reporting is that beat reporters are the ones who are the real threat, right?
Sure.
Look at Mexico today. Mexican journalists are attacked and murdered every single day because they're the ones that get closest to the bone. They're the ones that run the real risks. And they run them all the time. Mm-hmm. And it's not about proving that you're brave. It's about really getting as close as you can to the truth. And
Sure.
The more powerful people are, the higher up you go, the more detail you have, the more intimately you understand the reality, the less able you are to be manipulated, and the more significant and powerful you're reporting. And so in Kosovo, you know, the West was on the side of the Kosovans, right? And the Albanians. Sure. And the Muslims. Yes. And the Serbs were the evil ones. Mm-hmm. And certainly there were evil things happening on the Serbian side, no doubt about that. And there were evil things happening on the other side. And, you know, people can argue the details of that and where they feel that the balance of power and evil lay. But really, I was a young reporter at the time. And so when I was off air, for the morning news in Britain, I would just report for anyone who would let me. I reported for free for South African Broadcasting. And then I went, I was in there as a freelancer for CNN. And I had a career defining moment where people were coming across the border from Kosovo into Albania at Kukesh. You'll remember that border crossing. Yes. And it was an image of absolute misery and terror and human suffering. And I'll never forget that as a young freelance reporter, you know, I was at the bottom of the food chain, right? So everybody was mean to me. It was miserable. But I just went wherever I was told, and they went with the headlines and the lead stories. And one of the things that I did day after day was to make build relationships in the refugee camps with women who were being systematically raped as a form of ethnic cleansing. And obviously in Kosovan culture, this is very difficult to talk about. And so it took a long time. And that's what you do as a second tier reporter, right? I mean, you find the stories that nobody else is telling. That's your purpose for being there, is to figure out what's important, what matters, what's true, what's not true. And the one day a car came, the reporter decided they were bored of being at the border where the big action story was, and they were going to go to the camps. And I went, and this car, I was at the border that day, and this car came over and a whole family was killed because they hit a landmine of some kind. And so there were a few survivors from the car, but all these children and everything. And when I was, so once that became the story of the day, I was told by CNN to give it to the main reporter. So I said, no problem. And I'll never forget that as I was going through all my meticulously gathered notes with the ages of the children and everything that I had seen and everything that had been said to me in the quotes and all the rest of it, the correspondent from CNN at the time, who shall remain nameless, looked at me in front of, all the producers and everybody, and he was like, did you used to work for a news agency or something? And I said, because I worked for Reuters news agency for years. I said, yes, why? And he said, because I really don't need all of that detail. And at that moment, I was giving him the ages of these children and babies. And I was just like, okay, this is not for me. I'm done here. And then after weeks in the refugee camps, when I had the rape story and it was really powerful, they told me to give the rape story to another correspondent for no reason whatsoever. And I was like, okay, yeah, so I'm done. And that's when I was off. I had been offered a job at an aid agency, and I went back into Kosovo and worked for an aid agency, which was a really interesting experience because I then got to see how useless that system is.
Sure.
And ended up helping all kinds of people, going to mass graves and, and trying to help many different people from across the spectrum. And that was also the moment when I realized, okay, I'm built to be a journalist, not an aid worker. And there's a difference. And so that was very helpful. But I feel that what I lacked at the time was a true understanding, not just of history, because obviously we read about the history going into these stories, but was a true understanding of contemporary history and how that related to the past. And just one thing I want to tell you very quickly, because I know I'm probably talking too much about this, but the one day I was driving in Kosovo behind a car, the International Committee of the Red Cross. And I knew because it had the red crosses all over the car, and also it was full of men, and you could see on there, they love to wear those camera jackets kind of thing, right? Sleeveless ones in the pockets, and they all had the white Red Cross thing and the red cross. And at one point all of the people in the car were looking this way, and I thought, what are they looking at? And I had an Albanian driver, and there was a massive crowd, and what it turned out was that they had a Serbian man on the ground. They were Albanians, and he was on the ground and he was being beaten to death, murdered by the mob. And I didn't hesitate, and I didn't think. I screamed at my driver to stop, and I ran and pushed my way through this crowd. And I don't even remember what I was thinking, but I stood over him and I screamed. And it was so, I think, unexpected that this crazy woman in jeans and a t-shirt with an International Medical Corps jacket on was screaming like a wild thing, right? It was just unexpected. And in that unexpected moment, my Albanian driver too ran in, and we picked this bleeding man up off the ground and we put him in the back of the car. And we took him to the hospital. And it was so interesting because I had no idea who he was. All the way to the hospital, he was weeping and thanking me, and obviously spoke no English, but he could say, thank you, you could understand. And I thought, I mean, for all I know, this man could be a murderer, who knows? But there's a question of humanity. And there's the question of, the reality of war. And when we got to the hospital, which was still staffed by most Serbians, the Serbs had been very unfriendly towards us up till that point, because they were defensive, right? The war was over really, and they were,
because the roles were already chosen. They were the bad guys, and nobody would report the Serbian victims and the Serbian issues.
And when I brought this man in my arms, this bleeding Serbian man, to them to help them, they couldn't believe it, and everything changed after that. There was nothing that they wouldn't try to do to help me, because I think they saw that I was somebody who was open, not closed.
Sure.
I mean open, right? At least having an open heart and an open mind. And I loved my Albanian driver because he didn't hesitate. I couldn't have carried that man on my own. It was an Albanian man that drove that car like crazy to get that man to the hospital to save his life. Yep. And he didn't know anything about him either. And I've never forgotten those moments in Kosovo, and those extreme moments where you see such evil, but you also see how great human beings can be.
Humanity is, in fact.
Yes.
And what drives us to actually realize that we all want the same things, essentially. But you bring up an important point, and particularly talking about CNN and some of these reporters that will remain nameless. However, we still see them today, and we still see some of these same faces who have built their careers, particularly during the fallout of Yugoslavia and during the Kosovo War. And you see the same reporters back on CNN in particular, warmongering, and still actually taking the same type of narrative where there is no in between. There is no human story that you just told us. There is the bad guys and there is the good guys for the cause du jour that we have taken up.
Bad now, right? And Ukraine is good.
And that is exactly what brings me to today. Yes, so we only see the conflicts through this predetermined narrative and predetermined box. But so after, and let's talk about something that always struck me as important watching you and watching your career. You always brought up this notion of colored revolution and regime change. And so from the time of you being in Kosovo, but then watching what happened in 2000 in Serbia and toppling Slobodan Milosevic, that was in fact the first time that we have really understood the concept of regime change and colored revolution and what came out of it.
Yes, you're right. And I didn't understand it until years later. And really when somebody sent me Serba Popovic's book, right? What is it called? A Blueprint for Revolution.
Yes, Sergej Popovic.
Yes, and what was so interesting to me was how they had already popularized this concept and built a culture around it, sort of this, this cool contemporary culture around it, where it was like the go-to book for revolutionaries.
Yes, and it was hip and cool.
Yes. And which really tells you how a couple of things about how they have harnessed the power of what is cool and edgy, and look at all the Che Guevara, T-shirts and movies and things like that. Wait, Che Guevara was not a good person, right? And look at the evil and the suffering that was done by that movement and the innocent people who died. But nobody looks to that. We only look to the Hollywood film that lionizes Che Guevara and turns him into something that's cool and revolutionary. And so revolution is defined and owned then by one side only. And when you look at Popovic's book, what you realize is, wait a minute. I mean, Popovic and the Serbs didn't come up with any of this.
No, absolutely not.
This came from the same place that Facebook came from. It came from DARPA and the CIA. I mean, it's so, that's not a conspiracy theory.
It's proven to be true over time.
And by the way, the CIA from the beginning of time has been fomenting revolutions. So why would it be unthinkable that this could come from them?
Sure. But you're right. At that time, though, they harnessed it in a different way. They popularized it through pop culture. It was like a MTV type thing.
Yes, just in time with technology, right?
Yes.
Yes, which is a really important part of it, because that's exactly what they did in Ukraine through the National Endowment for Democracy and other NGOs. And NGOs, we've got to come up with a better word for these people, because they're not just
Yes,
they're
we
not
do.
non-governmental
Absolutely.
organizations. They are the brown shirts and the SS rolled into one. They're the unaccountable arm of government.
Yes,
And the
the
intelligence
permanent
agencies.
bureaucracy, in fact.
They are the permanent bureaucracy, but there's a dimension to them that even that doesn't begin to describe, right? Because they pretend to be one thing, they pretend to be charitable and good, where they're a front for a very radical political agenda that is being implemented deceptively under our noses, and they're everywhere. They're
But
also
Laura,
a place
so
to
it's
launder
interesting.
money.
Yes. It's
Yeah.
interesting that all the laundering money and creating these NGOs, quote unquote, around the world, particularly in vulnerable areas, the so-called transitioning areas, right? Like in Serbia, like around the entire Balkans, like in Ukraine or Georgia or any of these former Soviet Union countries. This is where they can hide all of this nefarious activity from our own laws, but use it, in fact, fast forward to 2020, use it to weaponize it against our own people here. And as we've seen, against our duly elected president.
Yes, and along with the criminal networks, right? Which I think is probably why they don't like you. Because we think, and it's a good thing that we think our leaders don't lie to us, our media is independent, that big tech and corporations are their own entities, and NGOs are good people and charities who are trying to help. But actually what you then find out when you start to peel back the layers is that there are these lines between these organizations, they don't exist.
No.
They're
and the governments of these countries, the pillars of the government serve the NGOs and not the other way around.
Yes. And USAID is implementing the Open Society Foundation and Soros and all the rest of their policies.
Absolutely.
Not the ones that people think they voted for.
Absolutely. So that brings me to the entire foreign policy concept that has in fact been proven completely flawed since, let's say, 1990s, at least,
it's a
where
lie.
we participated.
It's not flawed.
It's a complete
it's a total
lie. Yes.
It's absolute nonsense.
But so you've been in these areas. Let's talk about Arab Spring. That was a similar concept, right? And they were there, Popovich and everybody was there on the ground.
Arab Spring was the extension of Serbia.
Exactly.
That was the next phase, right? It wasn't a spring. What new winds did that blow in that made everybody's life better? Are women less oppressed in Egypt today? Give me a break. Is that the same for anywhere across the Arab world? Are people more free than they were before the Arab Spring? Come on. Is the world better because Muammar Gaddafi is gone? What did that unleash in Libya? And what has been the role in Libya?
Absolutely.
So no, I think what we saw with Serbia and the color revolution and the Balkans was the beginning of a modern strategy of installing puppet governments everywhere to prepare us for this moment where we are now. And depending on the history of the place, it depends on the level of your role in where we're headed. Because somebody said to me, someone very smart who spent many years involved in this, is that you can think of it like a global cult. It's a cult of people that come from every walk of life and religion who have installed systems, both like federal systems as you have in the US, but on an international scale, and local government systems at the state level through the NGOs that are their governing structures for how they intend to rule. And they don't need police and justice and things like that, because they have technology, and technology will be our policeman, and it will be our justice. It'll be everything, and they will control it all. That's their plan. There's a fabulous book by a guy called James Palouse called Human Forever. If you don't follow James Palouse, you should. His testimony on the Hill about this is really quite extraordinary. People think because we see communist tactics and Marxist tactics and communist dog whistles like mutual aid societies and so on, they think that that's what we're headed for. They think because of the role of China that we're heading into a Marxist future, but it's not. Those are just tactics to take us into a technocrat world where Marxism will be like a dream.
And that is that transhumanist world of the Davos crowd. And where they're, and you're right, they've prepared us, they've groomed us a little bit through this COVID time.
Yes.
And now Ukraine, which is fascinating when you really dig deep into what's happening, and we keep bringing up the regime change and colored revolution. A lot of Americans don't have very long memories, but rewinding back to 2014, what happened in Ukraine in 2014?
Yeah, well, what happened in Ukraine in 2014 is really at the heart of everything that's going on now, because, you know, in fomenting a regime change, I mean, basically the leader of Ukraine at the time was not prepared to go into permanent servitude under the IMF. I mean, he was resisting, and that's not allowed.
It is,
you know,
not
you
allowed.
have to go along with these international organizations, from the International Monetary Fund to the World Health Organization to the United Nations and so on. And in resisting them and in standing up to them, that is really what pushed the CIA to implement in a significant way in Ukraine and to orchestrate a color revolution, which would end with him being overthrown. They staged, you know, they put, I mean, Ukraine is also where Antifa trains. Yes. People don't realize and understand that. And Antifa all over the world train in Ukraine. And the Pirot party, right, in Germany issues a lot of the orders to their satellite offices in Ukraine and elsewhere. And from there, they destabilize the whole world. And they do it using deception, right? Because a firework always non-violent, except an industrial grade firework is extremely violent. And we know that. Yes. And so they take milkshakes, right, that are full of chemicals that are not non-violent at all. And they take water bottles filled with cement, not water, right? And so on and so on and so on. So they use these tactics to claim that they believe in non-violent overthrow of governments, but there's nothing more violent and fascist than every single thing that they do. And they say we're not an organization, because they're not. They're a network of many organizations, and many of those trails lead right back to Ukraine. To the same spot. The same place. And what did they have to do there? Well, they used a lot of those tactics, which they share on their websites like Crime Think and others, where they discuss these things and migrate their tactics through online forums. And they used that to basically get rid of the true leaders of Ukraine who were Ukrainian, and to install their puppet, Zelensky, who was an actor. You can find the videos of him doing their Dancing with the Stars spoof videos and black stilettos
and playing piano and
leather pants,
we saw that,
and leathers, and, you know, with his gay boy band, and, you know, and so on. They just get a puppet who's a good actor, and they put him in there, and they use him for whatever they want to use him for.
And they can easily manipulate.
Yes. And what were they very unhappy about? Well, they were very, very, very unhappy about Trump, because we know, I mean, what was USAID doing there? What was the Open Society Foundation doing there? They use the US Embassy and these branches of US government to implement their policies. So they say, oh, you can't investigate these people. Why is the United States telling the Ukrainian government who they can and can't investigate for corruption? Yes. And supposedly you're so worried about corruption in Ukraine. You have all these task forces and everything. These are just smoke screens for controlling your money laundering operations and stealing, robbing the American people blind. Every single one of us, millions of people from every walk of life who go out every day in this country and earn money and pay our taxes and try to pay our bills. People who take one vacation a year in the United States.
Yes.
If they're lucky, stay at a
If
Holiday
they're
Inn
lucky.
Express. If they're lucky, how dare you? How dare you steal from us and lie to us and then condemn us for being domestic terrorists because we see the truth and we realize that we've been, been manipulated, and what we've believed in for all this time has become an illusion because it's been infiltrated and taken over and it's become something else. And our intelligence agencies, God help you all.
Well, let's talk about that
when people realize the role you've played.
I'd like to talk about President Trump and his entire presidency and connecting this. So you and I have seen this on the ground. We understand what the blueprint is, that our agencies, our entire governmental structures and all the pillars of it got weaponized exactly the same way against our duly elected president and against the American people. So it is the same tactic that finally made it home. And it was
working together,
applied here.
Working together with the NGOs, the intelligence agencies, the media, then big tech when it came in, because it wasn't there in Serbia.
Yes.
Right. In the same way that it was in Ukraine. They trained the kids to be revolutionaries and, and all the rest of it. They lionize them. They make sure there's only one narrative in the media. Right. And they put their trained agitators and infiltrators, they're violent units on the ground. Mm-hmm. They draw the police and the army into a conflict that they are
and demonize them completely.
Yes, and the pictures do it for them.
Yes.
They train their cameras only on the police, right? And when you've got a guy in uniform with a weapon and you've got a person in civilian clothes who seems to be holding a bottle of water.
Right, the narrative is already there.
It's written for you.
Yep.
And so all they have to do is proliferate it. Mm-hmm. And with cancel culture, you can make sure that anyone who's standing up, speaking about it or saying anything, they get destroyed. So what does that do? It encourages a naturally existing human condition. Go to ground, because I don't want to lose everything. Do another story, pick another fight, do something else. Let me do a story about climate change. That's going to get me awards. I do a story about the truth about this, the CIA, it's going to get me killed, right?
Well, so you told a lot of truths and you were canceled yourself. And particularly now when all of these conversations were so important during COVID time, we have the cancel culture. Our cities were burning in 2020. They all had the clenched fist, which we recognize. So we know where this is coming from. And you were on the receiving end of a lot of this canceling. So what happened ultimately with even Fox Nation, where all of us think, well, here's Fox News, and we know that at least they will cover a certain part of the story. I guess not.
Well, they will.
Okay.
This is the thing. This wasn't my first rodeo. That's the second time I've been canceled. So it was fun, because I said from the very beginning that I am not, as they write about me in the Daily Beast, which was started by the CIA, another great, by the way, revolt.
They wrote about us too. It's okay. It's a medal of honor.
Yeah. So what you see, I always said, I'm not the darling of the right. I don't belong to any political party. I don't belong to the right or the left. I belong to the principle.
Sure.
I mean, I'm going to follow the principle wherever that takes me. I'm not carrying, some logo on my sleeve fighting. If I wanted to do that, I would be a political operative.
Sure.
I didn't become an activist because I knew even in South Africa where we were very much against apartheid, and I became a journalist to show the truth of what was happening there. But I didn't join the ANC and become a card-carrying activist.
Absolutely.
Because that was never who I was.
Understood.
And I could see that when sometimes the ANC was doing things that weren't right, that were hurting their own people, like necklacing them, putting tires over them and hacking them to pieces and setting them on fire. And I was like, okay, yeah. So that's not for me, right? So what's my role here? I understand the role that has when you're a political operative or you're a freedom fighter or revolutionary and whatever, but it's not me. So my role was very clearly defined for me instinctively from the beginning. And so, when I say fun, I'm being a bit flippant. It's fun in the sense that people don't often get to see who you truly are.
Sure.
And for those people who said it was easy for them to say when I left 60 Minutes and got a show on Fox Nation, oh, now she's where she belongs. For those people, it was, you know, what are you going to say now?
Well, because there is an expectation constantly to put you in a box, to put
not
you
an
in a
expectation,
place.
it's manipulated.
It's true.
It's manipulated and targeted to put you in a false box so that people want to hear you. What's their smear? Their only thing that they can say about me is she used to be this great journalist. They have to acknowledge that because, I mean, I have the Columbia DuPont Award from 60 Minutes for a 60 Minutes story, among many others. It's the highest award for broadcast journalism.
Absolutely.
It's the Pulitzer Prize of broadcast journalism. So they can't say I sucked, right? And people saw my story for years and years and years, you know, almost 2 decades. They know I didn't suck. So all they can say is she's gone nuts. She's gone crazy. She's gone to the dark side. She used to be so great. What happened to her? That's the same as Antifa says to me in their death threats that they mailed to my home. It's the exact same words. Well, what does that tell you? You're reading from the same script, you people.
Yes, absolutely.
Whether you know it or not. I don't care about you. I want you to listen very carefully. I don't care about any of you. Really, you don't upset me. You don't give me a bad day. You don't, because you absolutely don't matter. You absolutely do not matter to me. You are not ever going to stop me. People will see the truth. They will not. They will love me. They will hate me. They'll believe me. They will not believe me. I don't control any of that. I control only what I am able to do. So I'm going to keep doing my job until the last breath in my body. That's all I have got. And I'm going to be the best mom that I can be. And I'm going to try to make it to the other side, whatever that looks like.
And that is the principle, the core principle that we expect, and the integrity that we expect from people like yourself, from the journalists who are supposed to give us information and not condition us.
Here's one part I forgot. I like it when you attack me now, actually. I welcome it because you expose yourselves. You expose your tactics, you expose who you are, and people see through it. Millions of Americans today are aware. So bring it on, okay?
And that is
two
true.
Strategies, they ignore you or they attack you, right? Because on the one hand, they want you to be so unimportant, they can't be bothered to acknowledge your existence. And then on the other hand, when you get too close to the bone, this is why I'm with some other people, I'm going to establish the Press Club of America. And one of the things we're going to do at the Phoenix Awards, which will be our annual awards, will be an Over the Target Award for the journalist who was most attacked, right? And the ultimate award will be the actual Phoenix Award for the one who kept rising from the ashes. No matter what they did to them, they survived and stood up for the principles. You know,
and that brings me to a particular point in time that we are in. Are we going through this great awakening? Because I think you're right. I think a lot of people have finally realized that something is not right. Something hasn't been right for a long time. I mentioned to you before we started talking about this, I remember on January 6th, all of us got canceled. On January 10th, I saw a tweet by Darren Beatty, who now runs Revolver News, who said 80+ million Americans today are effectively the Serbs of the 1990s. And that stuck with me because the Serbs were trying to tell a story back then nobody wanted to hear. There are people today in the United States, 80+ or who knows how many millions of Americans who are not being heard, who have completely been demonized and vilified by these forces that you and I are talking about. But are we there? Are we at that great awakening? Or we are going to succumb to the Great Reset?
We are not going to succumb. We're not going to submit, and we are not going to surrender. Are we there precisely? I don't know. I think the speed with which the January 6th narrative frayed and then fell apart is a very telling sign. That's an indicator. Are there still people in this country who think that January 6th was an insurrection, attempted insurrection, and have bought into all the lies? Yes. So is everybody in the same place? No. However, every single day that goes by, more and more and more of the lies are being exposed. That's what concerns me most about Ukraine, is that, you know, just when you think, okay, people are seeing the truth about COVID now, right? People are seeing the truth about the vaccines. The vaccine dead and injured, the numbers are climbing so high. It is impossible to deny that there are issues with the vaccines. So many countries are lifting all of the COVID restrictions, you know, not just Europe, Iceland. Iceland has removed any restrictions even from their legal statutes.
Yes.
Right. And so what you see is my mother always used to say that lies have no legs. And it is true. Lies have no legs. What does that mean? They need other lies to hold them up. So you keep having to tell more lies to sustain and maintain your other lies. The truth doesn't need crutches like that. The truth stands on its own, and it cannot be changed for good or for worse. You cannot alter the truth. And people say, oh, but it depends, you know, where you come from and how you see it and what you, no, that changes how you see it. That changes how you feel about it. That changes what you want done about it, or whether you think it matters or not, and all of those things. But it doesn't change it. You and I either spoke or we didn't. We either spoke for this length of time or we didn't. We either discussed the things we discussed or we didn't. You can't alter that. But the lies over time are being exposed one after another. Fauci is pretty much in hiding at this point. COVID,
well, the COVID narrative disappeared and it was overtaken by another cult story, which is Ukraine.
Yes. And where do they go after that? And where do they go from there? That's my concern, because when you see Putin showing Russians loading nuclear arms,
warheads,
right? From the Russian Navy to the Russian military and so on, he's sending a message: don't go there. He is Putin is aware of his own strategic weaknesses and limitations,
shortcomings, absolutely,
strengths, right? And so he is very much aware that the nuclear component of this is the greatest deterrent of all, because that should be the thing that every leader in the world, every country, every nation says, "Whew, I care about Ukraine, but we don't want to go there," right?
And I think they understand those limits, I would hope.
And well, there's no excuse for not understanding them, right? Because you've seen it with your own eyes.
Yes.
Well, now what we have is a situation where our leaders, instead of responding to that by saying, we're not going to let that happen, that's what you would expect. That would be the natural, normal response from leaders who don't want to escalate. Instead, everything they're doing is trying to goad Putin and provoke him into doing something. And if that doesn't work, many of the different people that I speak to, some of them intelligence, some of them military, some of them defense, some of them strategic, some of them political risk, what they are concerned about is a type of false flag event where you have a nuclear feint. I know people who've planned nuclear feints as recently as the Iraq War, right? These are not academic discussions that you're having online in some forum by somebody who's guessing how it's done. These are people who've done it. So they know what's involved. And so you can have a nuclear feint where something appears to be a nuclear bomb, but isn't, still very devastating. Or you can have a dirty nuclear bomb that approximates a nuclear explosion. You put the word nuclear in there and you have COVID on, times a million. Absolutely. In terms of the fear factor, right? And that's what it's all about. In part, it's about the bomb itself and the attack itself, but in the other part of it is about the control and the fear. So when you look at how many millions of people have been affected and killed, are dead because of what they did with the bioweapon COVID, why would you think they wouldn't do that? These people are capable of absolutely anything. And I have it from multiple different sources that Putin has destroyed 8 bioweapons labs inside Ukraine,
And I'm hearing that there are 11 apparently.
There are 11. That's right. I also heard 11. He left the other 3 intact. I asked this specifically because the components inside were too unstable to survive a bombing. And if you look at botulism and other outbreaks that the Ukrainian people have been suffering over the last few years, they are being targeted by these bioweapons. And this fits into a broader pattern around the world. They were willing to use a bioweapon against the whole world. Absolutely. Why would they not use bioweapons against Russians? Other people have told me that these weapons are some of them are specifically targeted against Slavic people.
Yes.
So if that is true,
I've heard that too.
And if that is true, well, then that would be a particular concern to people like Putin, right? And not just Putin. And so what I understand, if you look at the demands that Putin has made, he is demanding the handover of 19 Ukrainian scientists who have worked in those facilities.
Sure.
There are more. I'm told that there are around 30, but that's the number that he's requested. And why does he need them? He has evidence, he has photographs, he has samples, he has what they have discovered on the ground going to those facilities after they've been destroyed. But he wants the eyewitnesses. He wants that when he goes to The Hague, because he's going to be accused of war crimes and they're going to try him. That's one scenario that people have floated.
That is being proposed, yes.
Yes. And when he goes to The Hague, he has no intention of walking away the loser, because the one who can show the violations of the Geneva Convention and crimes against humanity is going to be him if he has this evidence.
But interestingly, you mentioned that because The Hague, in terms of particularly the Serbian perception, if you look at everything that's happened,
yes,
The Hague is as they call it, a political kangaroo court. So is there really a possibility of a winner
of any kind of real justice?
Of any kind of real justice? Because again, it is always framed within the narrative and the cause du jour that we took up. And that court will continuously serve that purpose. But I have to say something, and I cannot believe that this is going to come out of my mouth, but I've heard from the American people lately, which is almost, you cannot believe that this is where we are. People have said to me in confidence that they really think that as much as they understand who Vladimir Putin is, that he is now the one who is fighting the deep state. And I just kind of was shocked hearing our Americans thinking this way, because all of a sudden they've realized that even people that they think were allied with the conservative movement or the Trump movement or whatever it was that was the principle, right, that we talked about, all of a sudden they flipped overnight and they cannot understand that now they're finding themselves blindlessly cheering for Ukraine. They're finding themselves again on the same side as the Soros and the Bidens and the Clintons and Victoria Nuland, who's handing out baked goods on Maidan, and the brainless celebrities and the virtue signaling. So people have woken up.
Without a doubt, more and more people are waking up every day. I don't know. It's unknowable if it'll be enough at this point. But what we do know too is people don't want you to look closely at the ones we demonize, right? They don't want us to know anything about Putin. He's only allowed to be an unsympathetic figure. And there is plenty there that you can criticize Putin for, and, you know, and some terrible things that he's done and still doing. And without a doubt, innocent people in Ukraine are suffering.
Are dying, 100%.
But people, they don't like to remember that Putin's family died in the siege of St. Petersburg. He lost his mother there, I believe.
Yes.
Maybe his grandmother as well. And what was the siege of St. Petersburg? That was during the Second World War. That was the Nazis. So when Putin says, I'm going to rid Ukrainian military of Nazis, it's not just professional for him. It's not just strategic. It's also personal. Yes. And I know there are people who will be jumping up and down about this because they'll talk about, you know, what Russia did and all the Jewish people who died in Ukraine, but they don't want us to look at Western Ukraine. right? Because Western Ukraine actually backed the Nazis.
Absolutely.
And Ukraine was a headquarters for the SS. And Ukrainians, as much as Germans, murdered hundreds of thousands of Jewish Ukrainians.
Absolutely, they did, yes.
And that doesn't mean that the Russians were saints. No, I mean, no one was a saint in the Second World War.
And that's the thing, that our history is so complex and we're constantly trying to paint it in black and white.
Of course, and that's a warning sign. Whenever you see that we're being painted into a corner like that, you know that that is a sign that you should look outside the box, that you're being trapped in, because it is a trap. It's just like arguing whether people coming over the southern border are good or bad people, want a better life or don't want a better life. Don't be ridiculous. You open a border, everything comes over. Good people and bad people.
With good and bad, absolutely.
So why are we only being allowed to talk about the good people coming over? Why can't we talk about whatever is bad? You know, that's a trap. It's a political trap, and usually they set traps that you can't win. So don't play. Don't play in their sandbox. Get out.
I think now that you opened up even the issue of our southern border, and again, it's an area where you and I both personally worked in, and it's close to our hearts, but because of everything that's happening in Ukraine, and then our southern border, and the entire world during COVID time has actually seen an increase in this. Let's talk about the human suffering through human trafficking, and in particularly how children are affected by this, because I know you've seen this through the Balkans, even human organ trafficking there that was perpetrated against the Serbs, but nobody ever wanted to hear those cases. Human trafficking through the Middle East, you mentioned Libya, women are being sold on the market today, to this day in Libya, and Ukraine is the same thing. They have a huge problem with child sexual slavery and human trafficking. And all of it is being brought to the United States.
And proliferated all over the world.
Yes.
And look, just do yourself a favor if you care about this, and look at what is happening to the Nigerians who are coming up through Libya. What is happening to the Nigerians at the hands of human traffickers? I mean, there are videos, because nobody cares and nobody's doing anything about it. The traffickers film it and they post it, and it's reaching relatives in Nigeria who are putting it out there. You can see people with scars down the whole of their bodies where their organs have been removed. There's one video when I was doing a story about the genocide of Christians in Nigeria for my last Fox Nation series on 21st century terrorism. This video has really haunted me and stayed with me. I am an African, even though there will be people who say I have no right to call myself that because of the color of my skin, but I'm born and raised in Africa, and I am a child of the African soil. Not in the same way, in a different way, but still for me, that's where my heart lies.
Absolutely.
And when I see a young African girl tortured and terrified and read the heart-wrenching posts on Facebook from her family, I can't forget that. I cannot forget that. And it breaks my heart, because Africa remains the one place on earth that is naturally from God the richest, and yet is the poorest at the hands of all of the people that we're talking about. The same people backing Ukraine blindly now are responsible for the rape, pillage, and plunder of Africa over and over and over and over again. And those NGOs that go in and build wells, how come there are still no people with water in Africa? You've been building wells for how many years? Wow. You've been building schools for how many years? What happens to all of this aid that goes in there? You know, come on, there's something wrong there. It stinks. And what I see happening now, you talk about whether or not we're waking up. There are more people waking up every minute of every day. There's no doubt about that. And those fixed narratives on Serbia really happened at a time when we understood very little about where we are now. Yes. In a way, you've been walking in the darkness alone, and now you have people walking with you, right?
Thank you. That means a lot. Because
I was one of those people in the darkness.
Yeah.
I didn't look deep enough and I didn't understand.
And it's been a difficult road, and it's been a road to potentially try to awaken people on that way, on that path. And I think we're slowly getting there with allies like yourself, because again, to that initial premise where we started our conversation, everybody ultimately, or all humans ultimately, should want the same thing, to live in some sort of happiness and prosperity with their families and with their loved ones. And that's that ultimate American dream that we always thought of. But the American dream is slipping away from us. Many flocked to these shores knowing that this is the one place where they can have that. And now that is being stripped away. It is being ripped away. And many of us have lost our homes. We cannot afford to lose this one.
And you know what? It's not slipping away. As you first said, it's what you said after that. It's being stripped away. It's being taken.
Yes.
It's being taken. And it only seems like it's slipping away because we don't see the hidden hand behind it. And that's what you're talking about, is people realizing that we've been deceived, and people everywhere have been deceived. And the outcome is not known at this point. That's the reality, is that it's uncertain which side will prevail. I believe in my heart that what is good will always prevail over what is evil. But we're at a point of confusion and chaos where these forces are really in war. We're in the midst of a
So are we in the midst of spiritual war? In fact,
without a doubt, you see it everywhere. I mean, when you have people saying that it is okay for grown adults to have sex with children, where that is a spiritual war. When you have people saying you can give birth, and if you don't want the baby, you can let it die. That is I don't care what you say, that is a very clear-cut line. You don't give birth to a defenseless child, have a newborn baby, and let it die, and say that that's okay. And then legalize it and institutionalize it. Oh, no, 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 no. And when you're saying we can't call people pedophiles, we have to change it to minor attracted persons. And your newspapers are writing articles, USA Today Life, saying that not all people who have sexually assault or rape children are pedophiles, right? And not all pedophiles sexually assault and rape children, as if this is some kind of justification. I don't want people to suffer. I can think of nothing worse than being a human being grappling with whatever, however this arises.
With whatever demons they have, yes.
But children are our first responsibility.
Absolutely.
Because that is as close as it gets to pure. And it has always been the way. As a child, when I was growing up, my mother would talk about, you don't want to be a pedophile in prison, because it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter how violent a criminal or whatever you've done, how many people you've murdered. The one thing that nobody will accept and tolerate is pedophilia. And so they even have to put the pedophiles in a separate place so they don't all get murdered.
Absolutely.
And today we're at a point where YouTube is promoting stars like Shane Dawson, who are joking about being pedophiles and joking about pedophilia and normalizing all of this and then glorifying it. And you've got librarians and the American Library Association putting books about teaching young boys how to pleasure grown adults throughout libraries across America.
Which is added to the curriculum.
Yes. And then I've got people talking to me about, do you know about Drag Queen Story Hour? And I'm like, I'm looking at them like they're the crazy ones, except I'm sorry, the American Library Association are the crazy ones. They're the ones who put drag queens half naked into libraries to read storybooks to little kids. And we paid for that with our tax money.
Yes. And that is, I guess, the final frontier of a collapse of a society. When you are in fact ready to sacrifice your children, I think there is nothing There's
think
no
nothing
deeper
beyond that.
hole that we can, nothing beyond
No,
that.
there's no
And we
greater
are
evil.
there, and we've seen it through COVID. People
Yeah.
were literally ready to sacrifice their children for
Yeah.
someone else's benefit.
And think
And
about
we
this.
are seeing it through all this grooming of all kinds.
Yes. And right now, today, more people, more women, children, and men are being trafficked
Yes.
for labor, but also for sex, than at
Mhm.
any other time in our modern history.
Exactly.
And we're okay with it. We just accept children will be raped in our towns and cities all across America every day. They will be raped and murdered. There will be snuff videos. We've got people buying live rapes online.
Yes.
On the dark web and watching them be raped and murdered, tortured and harvested. And we don't say a word about it.
But somehow the fact checkers can actually look at every single post that we post, but they cannot remove these videos. Somehow.
And the fact checkers somehow have access to information where they can definitively claim that none of this is true. What a gift. And
what a gift.
What a gift. Amazing. With that power, you would think you might be able to do something more than constantly try to deny something that we know is true. I want to know, where are the physical therapists and the doctors who have treated some of these children?
Yes.
Where are they? It's time. It's time for you to speak up. You know, and by the way, the same to the special operators who have been on operations underground in the United States and found children in cages and seen it with their own eyes.
And our US Marshals. And so that was something that President Donald Trump was really big on. And he started that task force, and there was a lot of movement and busting these pedophile rings, but media really didn't care a whole lot about putting that narrative out.
It was a shock. Yeah.
But so what is it about the human condition that consistently either lives in denial that this is not happening? Because you and I both know that even babies with the umbilical cords are being trafficked and sold for sexual pleasure. I mean, this is how depraved this world is, but somehow I guess humanity cannot accept that this type of evil exists. So we keep pushing it away.
I think
but it's out there and it's on our doorstep, and it is conditioning our children, unfortunately, as you mentioned, even through our schools.
You know, this is what I would say. They take our strengths and they turn them into weaknesses. It is a strength that most of humanity cannot conceive of, that type of evil. It means that they're not evil.
Yes.
It means it doesn't exist in them. And it's beyond, it's so far from their reality that it is inconceivable. And so that is a strength, because it means that the good in all of us is stronger than the evil. But they figure out a way to take our strengths and they use those strengths against us, and they use it to their advantage and they exploit it. So we are in a situation where that is being exploited. That's one part of it. The second part of it is that for the other part of our human condition are our weaknesses. And most people are followers. If they were not, then the leaders wouldn't stand up, right? The leaders wouldn't stand apart. We wouldn't make movies and books about them because they would be common. Well, what does that mean? It means that the leaders have to stand. You can't ask every person to stand. It's not built into every one of us. But at least you can ask them to stand in their way. Even if standing means not going along with the evil, because submission is when you cross the line to the darkness, right? So much of what they've done is designed to break our will. If we believe we cannot prevail, if we believe we have no chance, if we believe they're everywhere, if we believe they're more powerful, then we give up. That's what we do. And that's, to me, the most dangerous point. Because in any communist takeover, for example, historically, they say that 5% or less, sometimes 2% or less of the population is ideologically communist.
Yep.
So how do they do it? They break your will to fight. That's why taking the knee was so important. Because taking the knee, it's a strange act of protest, because it's really an act of surrender, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's an act of submission. So who are you submitting to? Not to the US flag and the Constitution and so on and so on. Who are you submitting to? And that is a question for you to answer when you take that knee. I understand the protest. I understand that you're not going to stand, or you're going to stay in the locker room. I don't agree with it, but I don't have to agree with it. It's your choice, a free country. And I'm free to say I don't agree with it, right? But at the same time, what are they really trying to get us to do? When you have white women on the street, and they love this popular thing that's being created of Karens, right? A Karen is a spoiled white woman. Karen is an instrument of hate. That entire meme and everything goes with it is an instrument of hate. It creates a preconception that every white woman is a spoiled bitch, right? And they need to be treated a certain way. And we now have to prove that we're not like that. I don't allow that. It's nonsense. I've never been like that in my life, and I'm not going to submit to that narrative. My dog has jumped off my and so what is it? Armageddon, yeah. Okay. So what is it really about? It's about that image of getting a white woman to drop to her knees and submit and apologize. It's about dehumanizing us and proliferating hate and dividing us. And my only concern is that people will submit, not realizing that what they're doing is submission, which is surrender. Because surrender, if you think about it, what can you not win? What has to be given? You can never take it. You can put a gun to my head and blow my brains out. And if I don't surrender, I never give you that victory, ever, right? I'll still be free to the last breath of my body. I may be dead, but I died free. And that was on my terms. It wasn't on yours. And when you turn off the news and you say it's too hard, and when you homeschool because you don't want to fight for that ground, and I'm not saying don't homeschool, I'm just saying you have to fight on both fronts. Because what did we do with homeschool? All the people who didn't like what they were seeing and who didn't agree with it for very good reasons gave it to them.
So we are giving up, essentially. We think we're winning on one front, but in fact, we're allowing them to take more and more every single time.
We surrender. If you choose not to fight, if you walk away, because you got to do this. Now, we can fight in many different ways. Not everybody is built to fight the same way. You can't ask the mass of humanity to suddenly stand up and be leaders, because it's never worked like that. Where in history has an entire nation or an entire world been a leader? Doesn't happen. It's against the natural order. And the only, the natural order of things is what it is. We didn't make it that way. We don't influence it. It is what it is. So what we have to do, those of us who can lead in any form, whether it's leading in your home or leading in your work, or, I had a banker say to me once, I don't know what to do. What can I do? I want to do something. And I said, keep the bank open.
Yeah.
For anyone, no matter what their politics, because that's the principle. And if all you do is be the one that stops that bank from closing people's accounts for political reasons, that's a victory. Fight in your corner if you want to. No one's asking you to be somebody you're not. We can't be what we're not. And we shouldn't try to be. Be who you are. And then we have to see. We don't know how it turns out, but know that there are people fighting all over this country and the world.
And the world.
Okay. Yes, there are some very significant things that are happening behind the scenes. People are fighting unpaid. They're fighting unrewarded, unrecognized. They're risking everything. They are not breaking the law. They are not insurrectionists. And, and stop. I think the one thing, though, that people can really do, don't fall for the false narrative so easily. Don't follow so blindly, right? Yes, sure, we're all followers to a degree, and not all of us can be leaders, but we all can ask questions.
Questions.
Yeah.
Question everything, and even
Question
these
everything.
blind narratives,
Including
that
me. Including
Of
me and
course.
you. Question what
Yes.
we talked about. You know,
Absolutely.
call us out. You know, we
Agreed.
don't know everything. We're not right about everything. Teach us something. We want to learn, don't you?
Absolutely. And we'll close with that. Lara, thank you so much for joining us today. What a pleasure to have you on. And I'm sure we're going to do some great work together and do this.
I really hope so.
Again.
I want to do that with you. And so we'll stay in touch, okay?
Absolutely.
Because you have missing criminal pieces, right?
Yes.
And others and I have some missing pieces from my experiences. And those things together can give us a bigger picture, because
Absolutely.
they're fighting on every front. They don't pick and choose.
They
fight on
don't.
all those fronts.
And
so
what's
we have
left
to.
for us is to fight the good fight.
Yes.
Thank
and I have
you
to get
so
my
much.
son from the ice cream parlor on Main Street.
Oh, good. Thank you. We'll have a great day.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.